Yeah, everyone's
ready. I'll start timing, so it doesn't matter.
Oh, okay. Well, I was ready for the streams.
Okay. That's fine. Which two am I?
There's one there and there's one there. Guys, our presentation's freaking tomorrow. God. It's gonna be okay.
And then you'll be done. Then you'll be done, and then you can be drunk.
Welcome. My name is Caroline Cook, and along with Tori Carley, Tim Leahy, Alden Picard, Lindsay Cruz, and Casey Martin, we're going to be talking about trawling, particularly in North Carolina. Trawling is a widespread commercial fishing practice in which a large, weighted net is dragged behind a ship or boat, catching a wide variety of marine organisms in its wake. It is practiced worldwide and used to catch a wide variety of species. In North Carolina, trawling is practiced in both the Sound and in offshore waters. Trawls harvest flounder, crab, and especially shrimp. Trawling is a major component of the global commercial fishing industry. In North Carolina, trawling accounts for over 90% of commercial shrimp harvest, an industry that brings in as much as $25 million in some years. Despite its importance to the seafood industry and to coastal economies, trawling is one of the most heavily criticized practices in commercial fishing. Trawls can be massive and equipped to spend weeks at a time at sea. They are unselective, catching a wide variety of non-target species that are discarded and thrown overboard as bycatch. These can include endangered species such as sea turtles and sharks, as well as juvenile species of finfish and other organisms. Trawls have a significant impact on the seafloor and on habitat, reshaping ocean floor topography and stirring up mud trails that can clearly be seen from space. Let me give you a few statistics to show just how serious the issue is. Each of you has a shrimp cocktail and a fact to go along with it. You could almost call them cocktail party facts. Let me give you a few. These are from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. 1/5 of the world's population depends on seafood as a primary source of protein. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that 80% of the world's fisheries are either fully exploited, depleted, or overfished. Shrimp trawling provides about 3% of the world's seafood harvest, but accounts for 1/3 of global bycatch. We brought in a trawl today to show you guys how the process works so that you'll know what we're talking about as we get into the details. I'd like to thank Carolina Ocean Studies for allowing us to use this trawl. The first thing to note is that this is a really small trawl. This one is a tester trawl. That's sort of the size it would be. And trawls can get much, much bigger than that. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. This one is called an otter trawl. And it's called that because of these guys. These are otter boards. The way it works is as the trawl moves through the water presses against these boards, and that's what holds the trawl net open. Now this one's a little bit heavy, but they can weigh 2 to 3 tons each, these otter boards. This is the sled, and this is what cuts through the sediment at the ocean floor as the trawl is dragging along the bottom. This is called a tickler chain, and what it does is it drags through the sediment and tickles any organisms that are living down there so that they come up and get caught in the net. This is the head rope, and this is important because this is one of the main ways that trawling is regulated in North Carolina. They'll regulate how long the head rope can be, which controls both how wide the trawl is, or the net is, and also how high in the water column it floats. You also have the foot rope, and again you can see it's weighted so that it can scrape against the ocean, or the seafloor. Down here you have what's called the cod end, named because trawls were used a lot in cod fishing, and this is where the catch accumulates. You can notice here the mesh size. That's the other way that North Carolina regulates. regulates fishing, regulates trawling. They can make bigger trawl. Sorry, guys. They can make bigger mesh size that'll allow smaller organisms to get through, or they can make smaller ones. Finally, this is called the saver line. And I mentioned a little bit earlier about how trawls will go along the bottom of the seafloor, and they can really tear up the floor, but they can also get stuck. You like to trawl in areas that are more productive, and a lot of times those will have really varied topography, and they might even be reefs. And so the net can get stuck on that. And if you lose your net, you lose a lot of money. So what this does is it'll float up near the surface of the water, and if the net gets caught, they can retrieve it using the saver line. Now, there's one thing that this trawl is missing, and that's what's called a turtle exclusion device. These are required in almost all situations in North Carolina. And what it does, trawls will stay, boats will drag them for long periods of time, and sea turtles have to come up to breathe every once in a while. So if they get caught in a net, they can drown. But what you'll do is you cut out a circle out of the net here, and it attaches to the top, and as the turtle gets sucked into the net, it'll hit this turtle exclusion device and pop out and get jettisoned from the net. So that's the basics of an otter trawl. We'll pull this out again at the end of the program if you guys want a chance to take a closer look. Now I'm going to show you guys a video of a trawl in action so you can see how this works. So you can see here the foot rope, and what will happen is fish will be swimming in front of it, and they'll be able to outrun the trawl for a while, but eventually they'll get tired and they'll get swept up into the net. So you can see how much of the sediment and on the ocean floor it's rearranging. This is a boulder right here, and it's pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, just moving stuff around. You can also see how much sediment this is picking up, and that's a really big problem. As you can see, trawling's impacts extend far beyond the organisms that trawls target. Today we will talk about the problems associated with trawling, the regulations governing it, and possible policy solutions to limit its destructive impacts here in North Carolina. I'll start by giving you guys an overview of the history of trawling. Trawling has drawn concerns about its destructive impact since its invention in the 1300s. Fishermen in the Thames estuary in England petitioned the king to ban a new type of fishing device that caught large amounts of fish, but also destroyed the mussel and oyster communities on the estuary seafloor. The king agreed, but despite this early ban, trawls grew in size and number for centuries. Ocean trawls initially used sails for power. At the turn of the 20th century, steam power replaced sails. This switch allowed ships, no longer as dependent on the weather, to range farther and trawl in deeper waters. Because they could move faster, they switched to more efficient net designs. In a short span of time, trawls' capacities tripled and in some cases even quadrupled. In the decade following World War II, trawls began to switch to using diesel as the means for power. Again, this innovation led to larger trawls that were able to bring in greater harvests. Nets no longer had to be hauled in by hand and could instead use the motor's power to bring their catches aboard. Additionally, trawling vessels began to utilize onboard freezers, which meant that they could store their catches and stay at sea for weeks at a time. In recent years, several factors have impacted the practice of trawling. Global population growth, along with an increase in wealth, has led to increased demand for seafood. At the same time, the practice of aquaculture has expanded, and farm seafood has replaced wild-caught on many plates. In North Carolina, the number of trawls has been declining since reaching a high around the year 2000. In a 2007 survey of fishermen in the Albemarle and Pamlico Sounds, trawling was among the least utilized methods, employed by only 16% of commercial fishermen surveyed. Despite its declining importance, trawling has an outsized impact on fisheries because of its destructive impacts. The opponents of trawling come from a diverse set of backgrounds, representing groups such as environmental activists and recreational fishermen. Opposition to trawling has led to bans and increased regulations in many parts of the globe as well as here in the U.S. Last year, the European Union proposed a rule banning bottom trawling entirely from the Northeast Atlantic. After heavy lobbying by the fishing industry, the restrictions were reduced to incorporate only especially vulnerable areas. In the United States, trawling has been banned in a number of areas, including 90% of Alaska's coastal interstate waters, as well as off the coast of Washington and California. Closer to home, South Carolina has banned trawling in nearly all of its inshore waters, a move that actually increased the state's shrimp harvest elsewhere. We believe that because of trawling's many negative impacts, it should be phased out entirely in North Carolina's inshore waters. With that, I'll turn it over to Casey Martin, who will tell you more about the environmental impacts of trawling. So, as Caroline mentioned, trawling is a commercial method of fishing demolishing ocean floors and ecosystems. The oceans are autonomous, which means no one country owns oceans and everyone has access to them. Therefore, it's very hard to monitor and enforce rules and regulations when it comes to environmental impacts. On land, this type of activity would garner much more attention as a result of such a destructive practice would be clearly visible. But because it's hidden in the oceans, for much of the public, out of sight means out of mind. Today I'll be talking about 3 of the largest environmental impacts dealing with trawling, and they are habitat destruction, overfishing, and bycatch. First up, in habitat destruction, taking a look at the large scale. If you look at the picture up here, you can clearly see the tracks trawling is making from satellites in space. These winding trails left behind by industrial trawling boats can be found in oceans all over the world. The trawls have literally scarred the ocean so much that you can see them from outer space. Turning up the ocean floor releases sediments, mud, and sand, and this is a severe issue in itself. Sediment is a major source of pollution. While trawling is picking up the ocean floor for miles on end, marine life are suffocating in the clouds of dirt left behind. These cloudy waters are also reducing photosynthesis, which will ultimately reduce the productivity of marine ecosystems. And finally, on such a large scale, the turning over of the sea floor releases long-stored carbon, another factor contributing to global climate change. Small scale. Now let's take a closer look at habitat destruction. Trawling is taking away the habitat of an abundance of marine life, habitat that is crucial to its survival. This is a picture of our own Carolina Bay scallop. It's a species of concern, which is one step below depleted off our coasts. Their depletion is mostly caused by habitat destruction due to damaging fishing methods, such as bottom trawling. The trawls scrape the ocean floors, bringing up entire seagrass beds with them, and communities of scallops here. These scallops need their habitat for survival. Seagrass plays a critical role in each phase of their life cycle. It serves as their nursery, it gives them protection from predators, and it's where they release their eggs and sperm for reproduction to replenish the next generation. And this is just one example of species relying on their habitat. Seagrass like this is home to a multitude of marine species, and not to mention all the other diverse marine habitats in the ocean, such as coral reefs. Many of the species that are not directly harmed from bottom trawling could be directly harmed from habitat destruction, indirectly harmed from habitat destruction. Bycatch. Bycatch is the incidental capture of unwanted marine life in commercial fishing when fishing for a specific species. The unwanted species are usually thrown overboard, dead, injured, or dead. Trawling is very unselective, so it's capturing virtually all marine life in its path. Some common victims of bycatch include sea mammals such as dolphins, endangered sea turtles, birds which do use the ocean for food, and sharks, which are heavily endangered as well. From keystone species which regulate food webs to filter feeders that help clean the oceans, any life in the sea is at risk of becoming bycatch when a trawl comes through. Bycatch is a major issue in industrial fishing because of its large-scale nature, and not much has been done to address this issue so far. As Caroline talked about earlier, there are the turtle exclusion devices, and they have been very effective to lessen bycatch. That's only sea turtle bycatch. We need an ample solution that protects all the untargeted species out there. And Tori will go a little bit more into those heads later on. So bycatch is estimated that up to 27 million tons of marine life are discarded every year due to fishing, with trawling coming in number 1, producing the most bycatch out of all the fishing methods out there. And shrimp are the worst of the worst, accounting for 1/3 of those annual discards. To help you envision the magnitude of the average bottom trawling bycatch to target fish ratio, we've prepared a visual aid demonstration. So, imagine you were throwing a cocktail party and needed 1 pound of shrimp. To bottom trawl for this 1 pound of shrimp, you would need 5 more pounds of marine life would be discarded in the process. And that's just the southeastern ratio for the United States. The worldwide ratio is 9 pounds of marine life discarded for every single pound of shrimp. That's an astounding number, meaning 90% of all of a trawl's catch is unintended and carelessly thrown overboard, just for a single pound of shrimp. Right, thank you. So that's something to keep in mind next time you're throwing your next cocktail party. Lastly, overfishing. Overfishing is when fisheries are depleted to such an extent that fish cannot replenish their own populations. Trawling aims to increase both food supply and economic profit at the cost of decimating marine ecosystems through overfishing with their massive trawl equipment. Throughout the years, trawl nets have gotten bigger and bigger. There are actually super trawlers out there that can fit up to 13 jumbo jets inside of them. It's basically the poster child for overfishing. This type of massive equipment doesn't give marine life much of a chance. The consequences of overfishing species has severe effects on their ecosystems. It ultimately leads to fisheries collapsing. I'll explain step by step what happens here. First, predator-prey interactions that naturally balance the ecosystem become disrupted. Any disturbances with this balance cause some populations to be depleted, while others expand exponentially in the absence of predators. This irregular fluctuation of populations leads to a trickle-down effect, because every organism in an ecosystem is connected. So trawling does not affect a single species, it affects entire marine ecosystems. If trawls cause the top predator fish to deplete, all the species below them in the food web would be affected as well and deplete over time. This leads to the elimination of fish stocks. We are losing a valuable food source many depend on for social, economic, and dietary reasons. That will all be at risk with the continuation of trawling. The most severe consequence is the extinction of marine life. When this type of destructive fishing method is practiced globally on a regular basis, it endangers many species in the ocean, especially those who are already at risk due to human activity. Okay. This is a diagram of a top-down trophic cascade example of what I was just saying. So shark species off the North Carolina coast have been rapidly depleting due to being caught in nets from trawling. Trawling would be an example of one. So, with the lack of there being predator, the cow-nosed ray species population has been exploding. This, in turn, has caused their main prey, the Carolina-based scallop, just like the one we talked about earlier, to deplete rapidly as well with such an excess population of their predators. This top-down trophic cascade is a perfect example of the effects of overfishing on an entire marine ecosystem. So while this main shark is directly affected by trawling, it trickles down throughout the food chain and affects everyone in that ecosystem. Trawling as an unsustainable practice. Trawling is an unsustainable practice for both the oceans and humans. Unsustainable for oceans. It destroys estuaries and nurseries, which is important in replenishing fish stocks. It destabilizes the natural balance of the ecosystem, disrupting the natural checks and balances that keep ecosystems functioning effectively on their own. It threatens species. The effects of this industry will cause the endangerment and extinction of species. Turns a large, thriving, diverse part of our world into barren land. Marine ecosystems play such an important role in the world. The ocean is rich in a complex habitat thriving with biodiversity. Marine ecosystems are some of the most diverse and productive ecosystems on the planet. Scientists have only identified a small fraction of species that live in the oceans. We still have a lot left to discover. Most importantly, oceans provide us with most of the oxygen we breathe and act as a carbon sink. Depleting life in the oceans disrupts these vital cycles. Yet, we continue to exploit the oceans any way we see fit. As for humans, we decline our commercial catch each year with continuation of massive fishing methods such as trawling. These industries are reducing their own numbers each year, so they're not even sustainable for their own industry in the long run. We're depleting a valuable food source. As we've mentioned before, 1 in 5 people depend on fish for their main source of protein. We reduce recreational value of coast. People value the coast and the oceans. Half of the population lives within 50 miles of the coast. Economic losses. Big economic losses to many industries that rely on the healthy oceans, like tourist destinations, fishing industries, food industries, and carbon. Global climate change is a top issue in the environmental field today. We are working on significantly reducing our carbon footprint. Bottom trawling is just adding to it. Thinking from an anthropocentric perspective, the effects of overfishing are jeopardizing the food security of more than 1 billion people. With global population increase and fishery stocks decreasing, this problem is only getting worse. Here's a cocktail fact for you. Scientists predict that if current trends continue, world fisheries could collapse entirely by 2015. It's a very real problem we have to deal with in our lifetime. So, in light of all that, to help you make great sustainable seafood choices, we will be handing out sustainable seafood pocket guides, courtesy of the Monterey Bay Aquarium, at the end of our presentation. These guides provide you with the best choice seafood, good alternatives, and the fish to avoid. And it's specific to our region here in North Carolina. So this will help you make the most environmentally responsible choices next time you're in the mood for some seafood. Also, if you're interested, Monterey Bay also provides an app for your phone. And that'll provide you with maps of your area to show where you can find sustainable seafood providers around you. So now you have no excuse. You can choose to support sustainable fishing methods. Next, Alden will be telling you about who is impacted by trawling.
Thanks, Casey. As Casey said, I'm going to examine who is more closely impacted by trawling. For this section, we're strictly concerned with the anthropocentric impacts of trawling. To understand these issues, it's important to define the different fishing sectors that exist throughout the world, as they're all impacted in similar and in different ways. The sectors I refer to are the commercial fishing sector, the artisanal fishing, subsistence, and the recreational fishing sectors, respectively. Let's start with the commercial fishing sector. Commercial is what it sounds like. It's fisheries that are involved in entering their harvest into commerce, whether it be via trade, barter, or sale. They typically invest large amounts of capital and energy. They are heavily relied on and invested in a profit. And they typically use very advanced gear. This gear can be very damaging to the environment, as Casey already shared with you, and it can also put lots of stress on your resource. Next, let's define the artisanal fishing sector. The artisanal fishing sector is defined by the word artisanal, which refers to the relative level of technology utilized by the sector. It's much lower level of technology than using the commercial fishing sector. They utilize fishing households as opposed to commercial industries. Less capital and energy is invested into the production. Now, these sectors are typically found in the developing world. The harvest for the artisanal sector typically enters into a local market, whether it be for commerce or subsistence. These are the key differences. Next, let's define the subsistence fishing sector. It's very similar to the artisanal fishing sector. Again, they're found in the developing world. One key difference with the subsistence sector is it's typically individuals fishing to feed their families and their relatives. Their sole purpose is for subsistence. So these catches by these fishers will not enter into a local market. Again, they do utilize traditional methods. They are predominantly poor people. Lastly, it is important to define the recreational fishing sector. Now, this may be the fishing sector that you are most familiar with. Recreational fishers are individuals who fish for sport, principally by rod and line. They typically practice catch and release. However, they may consume some of their catch. I consider myself to be a recreational fisherman. Now, if I had to rely on my catch for survival, surely I would starve. These people are typically found in the developed world. They have the capital and they have the wealth to fish recreationally. Now, as I said, all of these sectors are impacted in various ways. Let me put this in perspective for you. You have these 4 sectors competing for a common resource in the ocean. Shrimp, finfish, crab. They're all impacted. Let's start with commercial. Yeah, commercial fisheries can be impacted by trawl fisheries. So as we said, trawl fisheries use the trawl net with a small mesh size. It has lots of bycatch caught in it. These could be juvenile finfish that are the stock that other commercial fisheries rely on. So we have lots of finfish in the world that are fished commercially. Trawl nets can wipe out these cohorts of these juvenile fish and yield these other fisheries unsustainable. On top of that, as Casey also said, they destroy critical habitat for our fish stocks to regenerate themselves and produce sustainable yields. So other commercial fisheries can absolutely be impacted by trawl fisheries. Next, let's examine how the artisanal and subsistence sectors are affected and impacted. And it's very similar impacts because they're very similar types of fishing sectors. They're vital to the livelihood and food security of millions. Another cocktail fact for you. The artisanal and commercial fisheries catch the same amount of fish for human consumption, 30 million tons a year. And yet artisanal fisheries employ 25 times the amount of fishers as do the commercial fishing industries. That is absolutely phenomenal. Trawl fishing can undercut and actually increase poverty in these artisanal fishing communities. Another factor here is actually damaged gear. As Caroline showed you, we have our otter trawl. And these trawls in the commercial industries are much bigger. Some of the traditional gears utilized by subsistence and artisanal fishers involve fish traps, crab pots, things that are fixed to the sea floor. Now, if you will, use your imagination. Imagine this trawl just plowing through the sea floor, taking out any of these fishing gears that are in their way. Again, affecting the livelihood of millions of people. Lastly, we're going to examine the impacts of trawl fisheries on the recreational fishing sector. Now, the impacts of trawling on the recreational sector are arguably the most salient to North Carolina, because North Carolina has such a viable recreational fishing industry. Here's another cocktail fact for you. According to federal fisher managers, the total economic impact from coastal recreational fishing trips and durable equipment expenditures in North Carolina in 2008 was $2.3 billion, and it supported 22,000 jobs. According to the Division of Marine Fisheries, commercial fishing in 2010 accounted for only 3,997 jobs. While in 2007, according to Sea Grant, commercial fishing netted just over $82 million. As you can see from these facts, the recreational fishing sector in North Carolina brings in a significant more amount of jobs and revenue. Let's daisy chain this real quick. Think about it. You, me, the recreational fisher. Well, you got to buy your fishing pole. So, you got to buy your tackle to go with your pole. So, you got to go to the tackle shop. You got to employ someone to run the tackle shop. You got to employ someone to build the fishing poles. All right. Well, I want to get out on my boat and go out to that oyster reef and fish, or that coral reef. Well, you got to employ boat builders. Well, where are you going to keep your boat? Got to keep it in the marina. Got to employ marina owners, people to run the marinas. How are you going to get your bait? You got to employ people to go catch and sell the bait. Well, I live in Asheville, North Carolina, and I want to go to the beach to fish. Well, You got to have hotels, people to run the hotels. As you can see, the list could go on and on and on. It's very, very valuable to our economy in North Carolina, the recreational fishing sector. We cannot have it, it cannot be afforded to be impacted so drastically by trawl fishing. So, lastly, in more of a broad, overarching way, the tourism industry around the world is impacted. One last cocktail fact. In 1999 and 2000, more than 43% of all Americans participated in some form of marine recreation, including swimming, snorkeling, diving, and yes, fishing. Shrimp trawling affects the livelihood of these communities around the world that rely so heavily on these industries. Let me give you a little visual. Hawaii, Jamaica, off the coast of North Carolina. We have beautiful, beautiful beds of coral reef. People come from all over the world to swim with the coral and the fish and other lovely invertebrates that inhabit these areas. So before a trawl might come along a coral bed, it might look something like this. You know, lots of pretty fish and beautiful coral. However, after the coral is wiped out, coral is an animal, it will die. No coral, none of the relationships, the web is broken. The fish disperse. You're left with not really an attraction anymore. You're left with devastation into this ecosystem and devastation into local economies that rely on snorkeling, scuba diving, and fishing. The fish aren't there. Guess what? The fishermen aren't going to be there paying the money to catch the fish. As you can see, many, many people and economies are affected worldwide by this issue. Now we're going to explore the government agencies involved in regulating the issue. And to do that, I'll bring Tim to the floor.
Roland. So as we've mentioned, trawling is used to catch a wide array of species. So the regulation of trawling is achieved under the wider scope of fisheries management. There's lots of agencies and entities involved, lots of strategies involved. The management process is often very complex. So this is a condensed, brief overview of the agencies involved in some of the management process. Let's start off on the federal level. At the top, you have the Department of Commerce. Within the Department of Commerce, you have the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the part of NOAA, you have the National Marine Fisheries Service. You also have the 8 regional fishery councils, which are associated with the National Marine Fisheries Service. Let's talk a little bit closer about the National Marine Fisheries Service. It's also known as NOAA Fisheries. It is responsible for the protection, conservation, and management of our marine resources between 3 and 200 miles of the coast. They are responsible for adopting or rejecting the proposed management plans. They sort of act as oversight in the fishery management process. They offer guidance and advice to both the regional councils and state agencies in things like data acquisition and habitat info and conducting research. They also label fish stocks upon recommendations from the regional councils. These labels include things like overfished, depleted, recovered, concerned. Some of these negative labels require specific management actions, sometimes immediate management actions. And a program of NOAA Fisheries is the Office of Sustainable Fisheries. The Office of Sustainable Fisheries does several things. They do document processing in the Federal Registrar. They do management of our highly migratory fish species like billfish and tuna. And one of the most important things they do is they illuminate the social and economic impacts associated with the management plans. They also help to facilitate and coordinate communication between the state agencies and federal agencies. We'll move on to the regional councils now. The regional councils are responsible for the actual development of the management plan. So they're the real rule-making body in the process. Through research and data acquisition, they develop the actual management plan. They also do reviews of stock assessments. Stock assessments are usually done maybe by universities, independent scientific groups, or even the councils themselves. They'll do extensive reviews of these fish stocks, and they'll send their recommendations on to NOAA Fisheries on how they want these fish stocks labeled. Moving on to the state level, I've got a map here to kind of show how the different regional councils are broken up. You can see North Carolina, we're kind of a weird one. We're split right down the middle, kind of right at Cape Hatteras, between the Mid-Atlantic and the South Atlantic Regional Council. All of these councils work together though, so they're constantly exchanging data, they're constantly coordinating and cooperating to make sure their management plans are similar throughout the regions to manage these fish species. Moving on to the state level, in North Carolina, fisheries management has been delegated to the Division of Marine Fisheries. This Division of Marine Fisheries is part of North Carolina's Department of the Environment and Natural Resources. The division itself is broken up into 9 sections. These sections include things like commercial fisheries, recreational fisheries, data acquisition. One of the more recognizable and one of the more important parts of the Division of Marine Fisheries is the Marine Fisheries Commission. This commission is similar to a fisheries and they adopt or reject the proposed management plans. Moving on to the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, this is kind of the weird one or the oddball in the group. They were formed in 1942 from an interstate compact approved by the United States Congress. The states came together with help from the federal government, and they realized the need to manage these fisheries cooperatively between states. Fish do not adhere to state boundaries, so we need to manage these fisheries cooperatively through interstate management plans. If your state is included on one of these interstate management plans, you must implement some sort of rule or law in your state to correspond with this commission's plans. If not, the commission itself can go to the Secretary of Commerce and suggest that a moratorium be put on fishing in your state's waters. So these are some of the Atlantic Fisheries Council manages about 25 species. This can change, but they manage 25 species currently. So these are some of the agencies and the entities involved. Like I mentioned, that was brief. There's a lot of committees, a lot of councils, and there's a lot of people involved in the process. Moving on to the management and some of the strategies involved in fishery management. One of the main strategies they use and one of the more successful is setting quotas or caps or limits on the amount of fish you can catch. There's also gear restrictions and modifications that ties directly into trawling. You can limit the amount of gear, the size of the gear, mesh sizes, and things like that to control the impacts of trawling. There's area closures. Area closures are probably the most effective way to minimize the impacts of trawling. There's single versus multiple species approach. The single species approach, you're managing that single species in a management plan. The multiple species approach are 2 or more species, and it's more of an ecosystem-based approach, more of a habitat approach, more of an area approach. And then there's efforts to control effort. Things like limiting the amount of time spent fishing, things like limiting the number of people fishing, entry into the fishery, and also limiting the area. I've got a graph here showing maximum sustainable yield, and early on in fishery management, this is what they were going for. And still, some today, they might manage for this. But the maximum sustainable yield is catching the maximum amount of fish, the maximum catch, while still sustaining the fishery without depleting the populations too much where they can't rebuild. We've learned from our mistakes, and now we manage for more of the left side of that line, more of the optimum yield, or the better economic yield. Maximum sustainable yield has proved to be a failure in most fishery cases. So moving on to some of the acts and some of the laws that have been passed, fishery management has been going on for a long time, both the federal and state level. So these are some of the more important laws and acts that have been passed. On a federal level, we have the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation Management Act. This is a big one that really governs all federal fishery management. It's been amended several times. 2 of the more important amendments that have happened have been in 1996 and 2006 with the Sustainable Fisheries Act and the Reauthorization Act. Both of these acts aim to end overfishing, reduce bycatch, and rebuild underdepleted and overfished stocks. On a federal level, trawling management does a wide array of things like area closures, both Pacific and Atlantic areas, they're area closures. As we mentioned before, though, TEDs are one of the things people recognize and have heard of. These are turtle excluder devices. If you're a shrimp trawler in federal waters, you must have a turtle excluder device on your trawl. And almost all the states have implemented plans to correspond with this federal law. Moving on to the state level, like I mentioned, fishery management has been going on for a long time. The more important one we've had recently, 1997, the Fisheries Reform Act. It reformed several areas of fisheries like the management plan process, licensing, habitat protection, and bycatch. Some of the trawling regulations in North Carolina include restrictions for minimum mesh sizes, minimum head rope lengths, so the size of your trawl, and also we have things to control fishing effort, like area closures, time closures, and seasonal closures. So those are some of the strategies, laws, and agencies involved. I have a map here of the secondary and primary nurseries in North Carolina. It looks like a lot of our south and even up in a lot of our rivers and estuaries in Pamlico have been closed. All these secondary and primary nurseries are closed to trawling. But in reality, a lot of our waterways, we can see almost the entire Pamlico Sound where a majority of trawling takes place is open for all these impacts. So moving on to the management process, kind of a quick overview of what happens. An issue or problem is introduced. Anybody, citizens, council members, can introduce these problems. It goes through reviews, examinations. They draft a management plan with different rules and different options. It goes through more reviews and examinations and public review. Finally, the rules are finalized and it's time for decision making. This management plan is adopted or rejected. Rejected plans move back up in the process. Adopted plans move on for more review, more examination, more public review, and finally, the final review and adoption of the fishery management plan. And then there's the notice of final rulemaking and fishery law. So that was a brief overview of the agency strategies and process involved in fishery management. Now we want to move on and talk about some of these solutions to the impacts of trawling. So Tori and Lindsay are going to take over and talk about some of these solutions.
Thanks, Tim. All right, so as you can see, we've got a lot of issues with trawling. We would like to propose 3 possible solutions that we believe will help eradicate trawling in North Carolina inshore waters and specifically focus on the one that we feel will be most effective at the present time. Ideally, we would like to improve the marine protected area system in North Carolina, improve management plans, and research and develop more bycatch reduction devices. First, we propose to increase the number and size of marine protected areas and marine managed areas, known as MPAs and MMAs respectively. The image you see here depicts the North Carolina marine protected areas that are in the national system of MPAs currently. Second, we suggest improving management plans through more gear restrictions, more area closures, and stricter bycatch reduction device requirements. And finally, we would like to introduce more bycatch reduction devices through increased research and development. One example of a bycatch reduction device that you've already heard about is a turtle exclusion device, or TEDS. TEDS have been effective in reducing bycatch, but only for the intended species, sea turtles. Unfortunately, compliance is only monitored in port. Once a vessel leaves port, the fishermen can easily wire a TED shut to increase their catch. As long as the net comes back the way that it left, officials are none the wiser. While we believe that all of these would help to combat the effects of trawling in North Carolina waters, we feel like MPAs and MMAs would work best. North Carolina already has many protected areas. In fact, the very first National Marine Sanctuary was established off the coast of Cape Hatteras in 1975 to protect the USS Monitor wreck site. North Carolina has several marine managed areas that are eligible to become part of the national system should managers attempt to be included in the national system and complete those nomination requirements. It is important for them to do this, those managers to do this, because MPAs have been shown to increase biomass, and they can also be used for research and education opportunities. It is no question that bottom trawling destroys habitats. Therefore, a habitat-based resolution is the most obvious solution. Having a healthy habitat supports healthy ecosystems, and therefore bycatch and overfishing will be reduced. We propose identification and protection of primary and secondary nursery habitats, as well as other habitats deemed important to biodiversity, including deep sea corals and seagrass beds. North Carolina is in a very unique position. We have the cold waters of the northern Labrador Current mixing with the warm waters of the southern Gulf Stream right off of our coast. Where those warm and cold waters mix, we see there's especially high planktonic productivity, and these regions can support larger fish populations. This leads to an amazing diversity of aquatic species. We see some cold water species like basking sharks in the winter, and then warm water species like ocean sunfish in the summer. We need to protect these. We need to protect areas where these species coincide, because we are overfishing and destroying one of the few ecosystems on the planet that showcases this level of biodiversity and productivity. We are going to explain exactly what a marine protected area is, what our current system and legislation look like, different design aspects of MPAs, and how an MPA can be implemented effectively in North Carolina in order to reduce trawling. And Lindsay is going to start out by describing those MPAs.
What exactly is a marine protected area? In the executive order that set up the framework for the national system of MPAs, it defines a marine protected area as, quote, any area of the marine environment that has been reserved by federal, state, territorial, tribal, or local laws or regulations to provide lasting protection for part or all of the natural and cultural resources therein. Executive Order 13158, which was enacted during the Clinton administration, charged NOAA, under the Department of Commerce, with the responsibility of marine protected areas. NOAA then teamed up with the Department of the Interior in order to set up a national system of MPAs. It is important to note that inclusion into the federal system does not place that protected area under federal control. In order for an area to be considered by the national system, it must go through a nomination process. During this process, NOAA evaluates whether or not these protected areas meet three criteria. These three criteria are: 1. Must meet the definition of an MPA as defined by the executive order. 2. It must have a management plan that has clear goals and objectives, as well as methods for evaluation. And 3. It must support at least one priority conservation objective of the national system. The most prevalent misconception regarding MPAs is that they are all no-take areas, meaning that no one, whether they are commercial, recreational, or even subsistence fishermen who depend on the fish to feed their families, can fish within those waters. This is simply not the case. There are 3 general levels of protection. However, an MPA can consist of any mixture of these protections. The most strict form of protection are no-access areas. No one is allowed within these MPAs without a permit. The next form of protection are no-take areas, or NTAs for short. Within these areas, takings are not allowed. Takings are defined as the removal of anything from the area. For example, you cannot remove coral from a no-take area. The third and final type of protection are multiple use areas. Within these areas, management plans dictate what can and cannot take place within the borders of that marine protected area. In addition to having these protections in place, a national MPA must meet at least one of 3 conservation objectives. One of these is sustainable production. Sustainable production MPAs preserve a resource for future extraction. The next are natural heritage sites. These sites are designed to conserve the area's natural processes and ecology. And 3, cultural heritage sites. These sites are meant to protect our nation's treasures, such as shipwrecks. According to NOAA, currently in the U.S., we have over 1,700 marine protected areas. 437 of those are in the national system, and 9 of those are in North Carolina. 35 MMAs in North Carolina are currently eligible to be in the national system. Being a part of the national system is beneficial because it offers increased protection against the harmful effects of human activities. It does this through enhanced regional coordination between other MPAs and ocean initiative organizations, increased public awareness, higher site management capacity, and recognition of these MPAs as important conservation areas. You may be asking, why aren't the North Carolina marine managed areas enough? Why are you pushing for us to become part of the national system? The MMA system in North Carolina is not sufficient for managing our marine areas for several reasons. Our solution attempts to fix these problems, however, now will only explain the shortfalls of the system. Number one, we do not have centralized legislation governing marine managed areas in North Carolina. These state protected areas are set aside by legislation in various entities within the state. There are 11 different entities that manage and have jurisdiction over these MMAs. This can cause a few interesting problems when a decision must be made for an area. For example, behind me you see a picture of the Rachel Carson Estuary Preserve Dedicated Nature Preserve. This is one of North Carolina's marine managed areas. Not only does this MMA not have a management plan on file, it also, as you can see, is in the middle of a bureaucratic mess. Next, we do not have clear goals and objectives for MMAs in North Carolina. If we don't have these objectives, how do we know that these protected areas are protecting or are beneficial to anything? Be it biodiversity, protection of endangered species, protecting national treasures, or benefiting the local economy. Third, we have few evaluation or monitoring systems in place. This relates to the second shortfall of the system. We can't know if something is being preserved or protected if we are not monitoring the status of these sites. Finally, there is very little reliable funding for these areas. We need to ensure permanent and consistent funding will be available to provide long-term and effective management. Next, we will go into the design of marine protected areas, and Tori is going to explain all that.
Thank you, Lindsay. So now that you know the basics of the MPA system, we're going to go into the particulars of the ways that MPAs can be designed and how that will affect trawling in North Carolina. Areas of conservation originally began in the terrestrial environment, but as Casey mentioned earlier, ocean habitats are different because they are out of sight and out of mind. Also, because the ocean functions much differently than the terrestrial environments, when we try to apply terrestrial concepts to the marine environment, the results are not what we expect. The ocean is infinitely more interconnected and often thought of as a single entity. One debate that has been going on in the conservation world for years is the single large or several small debate, or SLOS for short. It started with the terrestrial environment when conservation biologists asked, is it better to have several small protected areas or a single large protected area? Well, most evidence in the terrestrial environment has pointed towards a single large protected area. In those smaller areas, we can see an increase in negative edge effects, causing a decline in biodiversity. Edge effects are the perimeter to area ratio. Increased edge effects are a less than desirable factor in the terrestrial environment because they can contribute to increases in disease, more generalist species, and fewer specialist species. However, when the SLOS debate is applied to the marine environment, we see much different results. While some scientists have concluded that a single large area would work best in the marine environment, other studies have shown that the perimeter to area ratio is not a limiting factor. These studies have shown that locations of MMAs and timing are key factors in determining where MPA should be located, regardless of edge effects. When considering the location of an MPA, the most ideal protected areas include two factors: diverse habitat and critical habitat. Conservation of migratory routes, spawning grounds, and nursery habitats are key. Research has shown that even though several small isn't the best solution on land, in the ocean, small protected habitats can work very well. It is important to protect a diverse number of habitats as well as nursery and migratory routes, even if the small design has increased edge effects. What we see is more kind of a spillover of the good things happening in the protected area into those areas that are not protected. This is great news for policymaking because legislation changes are more easily accepted when smaller areas are in question. Several small areas of protection from trawling that contain critical habitat provide an effective design for MPAs. While eliminating trawling in all North Carolina inshore waters tomorrow would be ideal, the practicality of closing off all or even most of these areas to trawling is impossible. Restricted access to large areas would not only be unpopular, but also to the various sectors that Alden mentioned earlier. Completely closing many important areas would have astronomical implications for not only the commercial fishing fleet, but also for people in the artisanal and subsistence fishing sectors. Those sectors depend on these waters for their lives and their livelihoods. Because of this, we are proposing the institution of dynamic MPAs, which Lindsay is going to talk to you more about now.
A new idea within the conservation world is the idea of dynamic marine protected areas. These marine protected areas are just as their name suggests. They're dynamic. They can be moved. There are two different approaches to a dynamic MPA system. One is that there is an overall managed area, and within that area, different parts of the reserve are protected at different times. For example, if we made a large area of seagrass a protected area, we would make certain portions of it no take or no access, and open the other portions to multiple use. The following year, we would then pick up and move the more permanent, the more strongly protected areas to a different location within the overall system. The other approach to dynamic MPAs is that within a large system of habitats, such as a coral reef or a seagrass bed system, a small percentage of those are protected over a period of time before the protections are then moved to another location within the seabed. Both of these designs fall into line with the several small design, as small areas within the reserve have more protection than others. Moving on to our solution specifics. Our first priority is to fix the MMA system within North Carolina. Remember the Rachel Carson Estuarine Reserve Dedicated Nature Preserve that I showed you earlier? This MMA is within quite a bureaucratic mess. It's the perfect example for why we need to fix the state system. This area has an MMA inside of it, and it's also within several MMAs itself. It also does not have a management plan on file. The sad part is, this isn't the only MMA in North Carolina that is like this. The first thing we need is to make centralized legislation governing marine managed areas in North Carolina. We need to have consistent management and clearly defined authority and responsibility over all MMAs in the state. We also want to see site-specific management plans for all managed areas in North Carolina. These management plans should also include clearly defined goals and objectives for that protected area. When establishing these goals within the management plan, monitoring must be included. Partnering with institutions such as universities could help not only monitor the progress of these MMAs, but also provide training opportunities for our future managers and scientists, us. We also need to ensure permanent and consistent funding will be available to provide long-term and effective management. To do this, we propose an increase to the cost of fishing licenses in North Carolina. By doing what is necessary to fix the state system, many of the requirements for becoming part of the national system are met. It's a win-win situation. Not only does North Carolina fix its own state marine managed area system, it also improves the quality of the state areas, and these areas will be eligible to receive the benefits of the national system. Tori is now going to include some of the more specifics of our plan.
Thanks, Lindsay. In addition to fixing our state system, which we can already see is in a big mess, we would like to also see expansion of the MMAs here in North Carolina. We would ultimately like to see all inshore waters in North Carolina designated as at least secondary nursery habitat. Think back to that graph that Tim showed you earlier with the red and blue. Now, I know we've been talking about the several small and how great that is, but these secondary nursery habitats are critical. Secondary nursery habitats, as defined by the Marine Fisheries Commission, are those areas in the estuarine system where later juvenile development takes place. Populations are composed of developing subadults of similar size which have migrated from upstream primary nursery areas located in the middle portion of the estuarine system. Under current legislation, secondary nursery habitats are closed to trawling and other destructive practices, to fishing techniques. We recognize that this is a large area to close, but because research in MMAs or MPAs has suggested that several small protected areas several small areas of protection work, we would like to see. Okay. Because research has shown that several small areas can work, we would like to implement these and increase their number and size over time. Our ultimate goal, like I said earlier, would be to have all inshore waters in North Carolina closed to trawling by 2025. Because oceans are a global commons issue, these designations would not only protect critical habitats for local offshore fisheries and economy, but for the world. In addition, we propose a network of dynamic MPAs of representative and diverse habitats, including deep sea corals and seagrass beds. The management plans associated with the MPAs should be strengthened in order to include closures of important areas during certain times of the year, depending on important species behaviors. Like I've already said, spawning, juvenile development, important nursery habitats, and things like that. But also, we can't forget to educate people. Education must be included in order for these solutions to gain support. The policy changes we have suggested are great, but they cannot stand alone. They cannot alone change public opinion or behaviors. The public must be aware of the importance of reducing the effects of trawling here in North Carolina. In addition, commercial fishermen should be educated in alternative and sustainable fishing methods. Shrimp don't have to be caught inshore. Like Caroline mentioned at the very beginning of our presentation, South Carolina still has a viable shrimping industry, even though most of their inshore waters are closed to trawling. However, because this is a global commons issue and a global economy, we need to educate fishermen in overseas as well. We would like to partner with international organizations like Oceana to provide education and lobbying power to effect change overseas. Now that you know the facts and our group's opinion, Lindsay is going to close us out.
From the evidence provided throughout this presentation, it is clear that trawling is impacting local marine habitats, biodiversity, and our local economy. Our group has presented the problem and given reasons why trawling should be jettisoned from local fishing practices. We want to keep our coral reefs beautiful and our seagrass beds full of all these cute baby fish that we can eventually fish later. Expansion and enhancement of the MPA system are the most feasible and effective solutions to minimize the negative impacts of trawling in North Carolina inshore waters. MPAs limit the destructive practice of trawling while allowing our natural ecosystems to flourish. These MPAs provide areas for fishing and entrust to us pristine areas to research, educate, and recreate. We'd like to thank all of you for your time and consideration. We're going to pull the trawl net back out as we had stated earlier, and all of you are free to come and check it out. We are also going to hand out the sustainable seafood guides that Casey mentioned earlier, so you can keep it in your purse or wallet and pull it out whenever the next time you're trying to order some seafood. Spread the word to your friends and family. Let's all make good, sustainable seafood choices for the good of our oceans. After that, we would like to open the floor to questions.
Yay. You're only 1 minute short.
Yeah, 1 minute. It was less than that.
Yeah, you're 1 minute
1
short.
minute, 10 seconds.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
I did a really long day.
Pretty good. I didn't know if you
Okay, Tori, keep an eye on Tim. If Tim doesn't mention the turtle CPR, you need to. We're gonna slap.
Turtle
Do you want me to say it? I can say it when I'm showing the
When I was
where the
practicing
twins are.
today all day. I said every time
Well,
I practice.
uh,
I got thrown
If
off when
Tim
I
misses it, then you should bring up the
Did you see what we were doing?
Yeah.
We were like,
Oh, that's what you were doing.
I was doing the
I
CPR.
thought you were doing like some sort of time system.
Would you like to hear my comments?
Yes.